All right. Thank everyone for jumping on this live. We all was blessed by the eavesdropping from the senior board of IC3 earlier. Right now, all of us will be together in sweet, blessed fellowship. But in light of this pandemic, we are not. And so I want to just go around the room, starting with Dr. Credit, and give your first thoughts. If you keep it to about 1 to 2 minutes, your thoughts, your initial thoughts from listening to the eavesdropping from earlier today. Dr. Credit.
So I'll be the first, well, I don't want to say the first one to admit, I'll be one to admit that watching all of these lives, not just the eavesdropping today, but a lot of the sessions has been particularly a challenge for me. And the challenge is because you hear so many different opinions. You hear so many different opinions that are rooted, of course, out of their experiences. You know, hearing different realities. For some, it may not resonate with you because it's not necessarily your reality or your approach. And so that's, like I said, that's been very challenging for me to digest. I would say listening to all of the senior board members earlier, great wealth of knowledge, of course. Out of everyone, I would say most of what Dr. Ralph West Sr. Stated, and most of his answers are most of what I most resonated with. I do believe that while we will face some challenges and differences even after the pandemic has ended, I think that our primary focus as pastors and leaders is to remind Christians everywhere that the purpose of the church has to be together. This is not, I personally don't like the language of, and I'm not judging anybody who uses it, but I don't like the language of, and I would encourage pastors and leaders not even to use the language of leaving people to think that it's just, you know, we're just doomed. It's over. We're going to everything. This is the new normal. I personally do not agree. This is not the new normal. And even if we were going into this as a new normal, I think that as pastors and leaders, we have to fight that. We know as leaders, we know as particularly as pastors, that our members, parishioners, and congregations that come to Bible study and other services and worship every week, hear the word in prayer, in Bible study, and still are babes. If we went totally online, we would lose the church. And I'm not just talking about physically, I'm talking about spiritually. And so I may differ than a lot of people. I don't believe this is the new normal. I am definitely not promoting that. And I think that I personally, all of my staff are off with pay. I deliberately am not having them come in. I'm not giving my congregation the full service. I'm going to say that. Keep in mind, I'm in New Jersey as well, so the rest of you are allowed 10 people. We're not allowed 10 people. We're only allowed 3 people because, of our high numbers. But I'm deliberately not offering everything that my congregation would normally get because I don't want them to think that this is the new norm. We need to be together. And I think that that's where the church needs to be. And that's where I stand. So a lot of what Dr. Ralph West said in terms of the church and community is what I agree with and what I really took away from the eavesdropping, while understanding everyone else's context and worries and challenges as well.
All right, Dr. Duke.
Thank you for having this. Thank you guys for joining us. There was so much to take away from, of course, what was given to us through the eavesdrop. I think, man, the thing that I was really impressed with was to see that demographic willing, and of course, we know who they are and the major players they have been in the body of Christ. But to watch them be willing to even address change, or to even embrace change. Let me say it that way. I do believe that there are some things that we will hold on to after this. But I will say, I think, I can't remember who stated it, but I think things probably will not be the same in some areas of our ministry. There has to be some shift. I think that what I got from it is it would be a tragedy for us to come out of this and try to go back and do ministry as it's always been done. I think, one of the things that we're noticing here in the South Florida area is, you talk about Bible study, and we only offer, Bible study in the building. And so I think somebody was talking about that. And looking at the numbers now and who we're able to reach during the week by creating this online presence is giving us a reach beyond our wildest imagination. I'm looking on hours and I'm thinking like, wow, I'm looking right after Bible study and I'm seeing 1K and I'm like, wait a minute, where did this come from? And so there are some things that I think we do need to kind of consider as it relates to shifting. And it was amazing to see that demographic embrace the shift because, basically the ministry that they grew up in and the times in which they have had to minister in, it's been basically brick and mortar. They know more brick and mortar ministry than online ministry. And for them to embrace it, I thought that was amazing. My father and I had an opportunity to talk about it, and it's amazing to see him embrace it. But that's what the sons of Issachar are. They're always trying to understand the times. And so that was the amazing thing for me, to see them embrace the times and be willing to embrace the shift that will, I believe, have to take place in order for us to minister post this pandemic.
Pastor Romell Williams.
I thoroughly enjoyed the eavesdropping, and I'm thankful for them taking out time to share. I think that collectively we all needed the encouragement, and it was sobering to hear that really at no matter what level you are in ministry, we're all struggling with some of the same things. I agree that we are being confronted with the need for a strange dichotomy. I don't think that we can afford to go back to church as usual, but I don't think we can afford to untether ourselves from the importance and value of in-person worship. And so the challenge becomes, how can we do both well? Because after this is over, it's not going to be an either or, it's going to be a both and. I sat my staff down the first week of this, and I just said to them that we're in an interesting place because we're not in the dark ages as it relates to technology, but we're not as far ahead as we need to be. And so I've been working feverishly over these weeks just to try to get us to the optimal place of ministry excellence in relation to this. We've, purchased more computers. We're in the process of buying cameras and all kind of things to try to make sure that we can be more deliberate about our technological footprint. And so we really have an opportunity to make an adjustment, to make a shift that has the potential to strengthen us. The thing that is great about this is that we can all come out of this better if we manage it well.
Carlos?
Yeah, I was really blessed by the conversation. Primarily for me, to see pastors who we all admire also wrestling and trying to learn on the fly just like all of us, trying to figure it out in the midst of this pandemic, and just listening to them. What really blessed me, intrigued me, a couple of things. One, Claiborne Lee was talking about this season of pruning as we have to reevaluate how we do ministry, how we look at even our staff and how we spend money, everything, and start realizing that there are some things that we've been doing that are not really essential. There are some things that we've been doing just for the sake of doing. And here's an opportunity, regardless of what context you're in, for if you're going to make changes, if you're going to cut some stuff, you've had challenges to be able to transition leaders or ministries or things of that nature. In this season, this is a pruning season. This is an opportunity to be able to do some of those things to make the ministry more effective and efficient. So I believe that's key, because that's what we've been doing. What are some things that we can modify? Because even though there's been an adjustment maybe in money coming in, there's also been an adjustment of money going out. We're saving money. We're realizing the money we normally would spend on a lot of stuff that are really not necessary, we're saving. So actually it's balancing out. And so we're realizing that we can do more with less. And so it's caused us to look at our ministry in that light as well. Understanding that although we're listening to everybody and seeing what they're doing, this is not a cookie cutter situation. You have to do what works for your church, what's best in your context. And I think that's key for everybody, because if I'm looking at somebody else's situation, I'm trying to mirror that and duplicate that in my situation. It might not work for me. And so I have to do what's best. And as I was listening, I'm just hearing so many different methodologies and strategies that they were all using. They were not the same, but they were doing what was best for their context. And so I believe we all have to do the same thing, to really just look at our church, be honest, and realize that there are some things, because we cannot just go back to doing things exactly the way they were. I believe this is a season where there were some holes that were exposed in our ministry that we realized we had to be honest. And, I was like Duke, I wasn't, streaming my Bible study because I wanted them to come to Bible study. And so they put a limitation on our numbers, but now the numbers are through the roof. And it's like, how can you go back when you have really gained so much momentum? So it was so much, man, but those are some things I got.
Dr. Turner.
And thank you for allowing this conversation to happen. And thank you, those of you who joined us. Let me just say, I'm deeply appreciative for the board allowing their conversation to happen in plain sight, to allow us to eavesdrop, because oftentimes when you go to most conferences, the discussion is laden with the finished product of what the ministry has become. Very rarely do you have discussions about what's in process. And it's so helpful for each of us. It's not particularly for us to take, hook, line, and sinker. The way somebody who's in a completely different context is resolving what's going on in their context, but it is for us to understand the thought process. But where we are today is no different than, as I think about the story of not just the early church, but think about Israel in the Old Testament, always having to reimagine what it is to practice the faith, gather as a community, and having to understand that from enslavement in Egypt, understand it in the wilderness, understand it in the promised land, understand it in exile. And so we are no different in our day and time, that we're trying to reimagine what it means to practice our faith in this day and in this time. And I would say much of what our conversation has been centered on is, definitely the benefit of technology. part of the benefit of this moment is that I believe, and I believe scripture kind of supports this, that yes, we gather for worship, but the primary place for discipleship to take place is in the home. And so I think we need to broaden our understanding of what it means to be a community of faith, that it doesn't all center around the institution's building, but it is, I believe, the spirit that that community is able to, where the faith is practiced beyond the four walls in homes.
Absolutely. I don't know who it is, but if you got noise in the background, just go ahead and mute yourself, please. Dr. Parks.
Thank you, George. Pastor Hurtt, I was grateful to catch most of the eavesdropping. I think it was a wonderful chance for us to get a close-up view of many of our sages, our heroes, those whom we look up to. I agree wholeheartedly with Pastor Turner, and as well as this is an opportunity for us to bring the church to individuals' homes. But also what I learned most, I believe it was Dr. Lee, is this is a great chance for us to take a look and reevaluate our ministries. And oftentimes crises breeds opportunity. And I think this is a great opportunity, but also with opportunity brings a level of anxiety. And I think the sages, the board, let us know that. And I think we have to be okay to sit with our anxiety. For so long, preachers, we have this, I don't even think we know it sometimes, but consciously we have this persona that we have it all together. But this is a season where all of us are swimming upstream and just trying to make sense of the crises that we're in, but still trying to produce kingdom moments and Christ moments for the rest of the world.
Amen. Dr. Jamal?
Thank you again, Pastor Hurtt, and to all of the brothers and sisters who are on the line and who are watching. So the eavesdropping, of just like everybody else, I was extremely appreciative for the senior board kind of getting naked before us and letting us know that they are too experiencing, experiencing a measure of anxiety as well. But for me, it was, so that was consolation for me. It was comforting to know that some of the things that I'm experiencing in New Orleans with the ministry at New Hope is not exclusive to me, and I'm not isolated, but everybody's kind of having the same concerns and the same challenges, the same issues to some degree. And then I was able to get some confirmation because some of the things, although everything that some of the senior board members are doing, I'm not able to do it in New Orleans, but some of those things that they threw out there, I was thinking to myself, you know, we did that, or I was thinking to do that. So it was actually confirmation for me in some of the things that I'm planning to do over the next few weeks. One of the things that resonated the most was the fact that we can use this opportunity to rest. I think Dr. Hale said that, and boy, when she said that, I kind of screamed inside because I actually heard God tell me, be still. I actually had the virus, so it put me down for 2 weeks, and then several key people in our church had it, and some of the ministry things that we do in ministry we weren't able to do, and it's kind of just now getting to a place where we can move out and start doing some other things as far as outreach is concerned, but it has definitely taught me that rest is good. So I'm appreciative, and I guess that I'll just end it right there.
Man, praise God for your healing, man. Glad to hear you doing well. Thanks for sharing your testimony. Yeah. Raphael?
Thank you, Pastor Hurtt. I think when we were listening to the eavesdrop, to listen to all those great sages of the pulpit, it does give you some kind of ease that everyone is on even playing field. Everyone is dealing with the crisis, because crisis really is not meant to leave us the way it found us. So we already know. I've been speaking to a lot of the members and just speaking to a lot of my friends. You try to help people to get that normalcy out of their voice. I said, it'll never be the way it was. It'll never be that way. But what we have to deal with, it took me back to Atlanta when we had our meeting in December to go back to fix the future. I've been reading through the book of Daniel this entire time. I'll be completely honest. The first 3 weeks of the pandemic, I was just frustrated, because those of you all who know me, I don't sit still. So we've had to get still, one, to make peace with the predicament. And then now we're living in a strange land. We really are in a strange land right now. This is something that none of us have ever seen. Our grandparents, the closest thing they've ever had to this is the Great Depression. So we're living in a strange land right now. Then we have someone in the Oval Office who's really trying to inflict genocide because life isn't the most important thing. They want the economy to get back to where it needs to be. But church and dealing with the spiritual life is our business. So we have to really sit back, reevaluate. As Dr. Hill said, come to the huddle, strategize, because church won't be the same. You're now speaking of having to sanitize the sanctuary between each service, things of that matter. I mean, Pastor Parks and I, we talk often, and we always say sometimes we can always jump into the high, heavier, holier all the time, but you have to look at the lower light of lesser, which is the human condition. So you really have to get into the hearts and the minds of the people, because it's going to be for some time now. People are going to be very standoffish. Church, and that's not the church we come out of. We come out of a church hugging and kissing. That's what we do. That's a part of the Black church in particular. So really, there has to be a lot of strategy that has to take place. But it's a great time to do ministry. And if you haven't been writing any sermons, the Lord has given us a lot to write and preach about now.
Amen. Dr. Edwards, Lee.
Hey, everybody. Once again, George, thanks for hosting us on this platform, and thanks for everybody that's tuning in. I thought it was very insightful for eavesdropping as we listened in to see everybody on the platform being so vulnerable at that moment, and the ability for us to come together and realize that so much is changing and how quickly it is changing. Keelan said it, perfectly, and that is for them to embrace change was an amazing insight. We live in a culture where things are changing so quickly, but when it comes to the church, we're always behind. And now the church as a whole is being pushed in a certain direction where things are going to be thought of differently. From Bible studies all the way down to discipleship. And I think, I forgot that brought it up was talking about discipleship, but from a church side and church perspective, from a smaller church, for myself, discipleship is something that has been typically pretty easy for us because we're in a smaller venue. And now we are faced with a position where everybody is struggling with the same thing, and that is discipleship, that touch, one-on-one touch with each other, ability to speak about to each other and really ask those questions back and forth and grow with one another. And now we're being put in a platform where everybody is, on a Sunday morning, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, Thursday, whenever you have Bible study. Now you are so far away from each other. You can't have those interactions. You can't see or you can't track that spiritual growth with one another. And that puts us all in definitely a different platform. So it's interesting to see how the church is moving, how it's growing. For the last few weeks, we have all been running to find out how is it that we can get our media teams all on an optimal level. And now, as we go forward, we're looking at how we can make sure that our ministries are operating on an optimal level as we balance both in-house worship and online worship. I have to give it out to IC3 as a whole, from the advisory board to the senior advisory board. The work that we did last year to leading in uncharted territories, and to see us here on today is almost prophetic. So, you know, thank you once again. And I'm looking forward to what we have going forward.
Reverend West.
They want to ask me this at the same time while everybody want to text me at the same time. I'm not gonna let y'all make me crack. The question was what did I think about the eavesdropping from the elders? I wrote down some notes earlier. Lawrence Aker made the statement about, you know, hey, you know, scripture talks about new wine and old wineskins, and I remember the what's echoing in my mind right now is William Curtis reading off the question of Vashti McKenzie and the answer of that Bishop Reed gave us. The question was, you know, what do we take away? What do we take for the future, and what do we leave behind? And Reed just simply said, we take whatever's working and we leave whatever's not working. What that said for me more than anything else is that the board, in so many words, mentioned that COVID-19 has pulled back the covers on all of our ministries. It's exposed all of us. Not only are we on a level playing field, but whatever it is that has been working for us in our individual ministries is now being exposed. Whatever isn't working in our ministries being exposed. One thing that can be said is that in the midst of this pandemic, the time of pruning and transition, this is not a one-size-fit-all solution for every church. You know, every church has a different issue that they must address adequately with precision during this time. But the good news is that it's a time, like I said, of evaluation. You know, what works at whatever size church in up north may not work at this church down south, you know. But what I also took away from the eavesdrop is, I was enjoying listening to their struggle and push to remain fresh and relevant in their preaching and their teaching right now, because all of them have, they have 30 years plus worth of preaching that they can just dig in the back, edit and play. And Morris Watson, so many words, you know, encouraged all the brothers, hey, listen, you know, this ain't the time to reach in your archives and and pull out some of your sugar sticks that you shut it down, you know, a couple years ago. Now, this is a time to remain fresh, you know, because we have more than enough at our fingertips to preach right now. And as I was listening to them, in so many words, right now, while they're remaining fresh and relevant, it's forcing us to make our preaching more precise, you know. Many times when we do our exposition work, we may pull the illustration, we may not, but when it turns to our application, that's normally the area where people say you're chasing rabbits, you know, say if you're talking about, you know, redeem the time because the days are evil, you know, have this going on around the world, days are evil, just go on these runs, but, you know, you can't run chase rabbits right now because the people want to know, what does God's word have to say to me right now, today, April 29, 2020, concerning how I keep my sanity and my spiritual vitality in the midst of a pandemic. You know, I ain't trying to get no more money because, I mean, shoot, I'm accidentally saving money because I can't spend it. You know, I ain't worried about no trips to entertain myself or impress nobody because I can't go nowhere. So if anything, as I was listening to the sages, this is a time to, you know, reevaluate what's working and not working in our ministries, to focus our preaching with precision, and we're being forced to stay fresh. And Pastor Turner said it a few weeks ago, the guys who manage this well are the people that'll come out on top of our head whenever we come out of this. But at the same time, more than anything else, you know, whatever's working at the Church Without Walls, whatever's working at Shiloh, whatever's working in Kingdom Life, you know, it's a time for you to evaluate what's going on at your church. And it may not, whatever's working at your church, let's, as Dr. Gregory would say, let's add strength to strength. You know, whatever's not working, you know, we can fade it on out. You know, and that might be ministry-wise, staff, people, you know, and in the words of Pastor West, this is an exciting time to be alive. I mean, it takes a lot of a lot of faith, growth, and courage to make a statement like that. It is exciting, you know, even though it's uncomfortable. But it was definitely enriching and encouraging to listen to them, you know, be vulnerable. Because many times when we talk to any of them, let's be honest, George, they know everything. It ain't too many questions they don't have an answer for. And but it was enjoyable, kind of fun to hear them be vulnerable in the sense like, man, we've never seen this. We don't know what's gonna happen. We just got to ride this thing out together, you know.
Amen. Good to see Pastor Barry jumping on with us little folks here. Good to see you.
Sorry to wrap. I'm gonna get comfortable since I turned. I got your message, man.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for getting to come on with us, man.
I had to record today.
But before we jump into you, I want Kim and Ralph, I want to stay with you to address this question. And then Emery, you can prepare if you got a chance to watch Eavesdropping, what jumped out to you. That's where we're at.
Okay.
Is there something that you all heard that you did not hear that you wanted to hear, or something that you heard that you felt like, yeah, y'all can say that, but it's a little bit more different for us? Kim or Ralph, anything that you did not hear that you wanted to hear? It was a limited time, obviously, or there's something you heard that you said, yeah, but that's easy for y'all to say. It's a little bit more difficult for us.
I think with eavesdropping and a lot of these conversations, what I've found to be missing is real talk about congregations of, let's say, 800 and less. Okay. When you are pastoring a mega church, you're not, you have systems that are set up for pastoral care. You're not as hands-on, even if you would like to be, as a pastor of several hundred. And so a lot of our leading pastors and voices and sages that we are listening to and certainly are learning from and want to hear from, seem a bit removed from the normal people who are pastoring 500, 600 people, who happen to know, just about every burst in the congregation, who are used to calling, people by name. And so that's particularly what I would say I would be looking for. I'm doing a lot of pastoral work. Thank God I have ministers who all lead ministries, and every week their responsibility is whatever ministry, what area of people they're over, youth, young adults, senior adults, to connect with them every week. And then I pop in and do things like that. But I'm just thinking, like, if I didn't have that, and just trying to connect. And so I think, talking more about pastoral care for those who have memberships 800 and less or less, and who are more hands-on just by nature of their ministry.
Fair enough. Ralph?
What I heard in partnership to what Kim said was what I heard, what I wasn't expecting to hear, was when I heard Reed and Jeffrey Johnson make the statement that there are some churches that are significantly smaller than theirs or the average church, and they were begging them, hey, put these misconceptions and fears aside that you have about these larger churches and ask for help. I was surprised, not shocked, but I was glad to hear them say, any of you that are logging on, any churches in Philadelphia, Indianapolis, whatever city, if you need some help, ask, and help doesn't always have to be monetary, it can be ministry as well. That was something I wasn't expecting to hear that I heard. What I wanted to hear, and they said it, I already mentioned it, was Dr. Marius Watson, in so many words, calling out the preachers who I preaching fresh sermons and going to the archives, you know. It's like, you know, like, hey man, no, this ain't the time to be, you know, preaching sermons that you preached 4 or 5 years ago on Sunday right now. No, you know, and I appreciate it, you know, even if it means you recording like Emory did today, record on Wednesday, edit it for graphic and on Sunday. You know, this is a time to be fresh. I appreciated him making that statement and challenging preachers, because everybody on that board, you know, they come in fresh heat every week, you know. You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know anybody who wasn't in the congregation by listening to them. You know, a couple of them dropping classics right now. So that's something I heard that I wanted to hear. I was kind of surprised, but I mean, it is eavesdropping. You know, that's how they are when no cameras around. Not completely.
I got you. You kind of told us. You kind of told us what you heard, that you glad you was here. The question was, did you hear something that you didn't hear? But I understand that you didn't want to wrinkle any feathers. Those are all your uncles. So, Emory, Emory, can you tell us about your eavesdropping?
Hey, listen, I want to say something to the public right now who are paying attention to this. Remember this eavesdrop right now that we having as George Eugene Hurtt as a leader, and remember 2019. He ain't had much to say last year. He's feeling himself, right?
Yeah. Emory, the floor is yours now. Thanks, Ralph, for reminding us of that.
Hello, fam. It's good to see everybody. I would say, like much of what you all have already said, you know, this really spoke to me. But I really appreciate it. I don't know if anybody said it already, but Claiborne Lee's like transparency around just the depression piece, you know. And I thought that was real, that just the pressure that we're feeling as pastors, or even, you know, I'll just speak for myself. But I think, you know, it was a third Sunday in March, you know, everybody's wrestling with, do I not have virtual service? Do I do in person? And that was stressful. Then the next week, you know, just the stress of making sure that your online platform was tight. You know, then week 3 was, you know, trying to hear about the PPP, you know, and then making sure you applied. You know, then the pressure was, did you get your money, or, you know, did you get approved? And then I think now, you know, and giving, let me go back to, you know, week 3, week 4, you know, are my people going to give? You know, how are we going to negotiate that? And then I think now kind of the pressure we're dealing with is this whole relaunch piece. And so I've been working a lot on developing something called a relaunch roadmap that I'll be willing to share with, you know, with you all, with the team, that just some, you know, where it's just really plug and chug, you know, in these areas. What are you going to do? And it's a good communication piece to send to your folks. But I just appreciate his transparency, like just the pressure that, you know, each week has been something, a different focus that we've had to put energy into.
Praise God. Lee and Dr. Duke, I want to ask you a question about this preaching component. As you hear them talk about preaching, even that has referenced, especially by Ralph, the fresh sermon aspect of it. How did you take that, and do you necessarily all the way agree with that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for asking. Definitely, as far as the preaching component, for myself, coming into the time, first, people wanted to know how to deal with it. We heard from the news how they were dealing with it. We heard from Facebook how to deal with it. We heard from our government, you know, how to deal with things. And at some point in time, I got to the position where the church also needs to know, from a church perspective and as Christians, how are we going to be dealing with it? One of the biggest things, and as I continue to move on, is now I'm asking, when do I move from preaching about these issues with coronavirus and begin to, you know, move into another direction about rebuilding, and another direction about faith or prayer, and these components that will build on top of that. Because if you've gone on Facebook or whatever platform you hear everybody in some way, shape, or form, they are always going to reference the coronavirus. So getting to a place where, you know, you are staying fresh, but then asking the question, when does coronavirus then become unfresh? When are we just saying the same thing, you know, time again? So it's also important for that. But it is going to change the world of preaching, because since so many people are listening to your sermons on these platforms now, it's going to be hard to re-preach a sermon, because it may be a position where you preached at one church, but that one church, they've heard you preach before, you know, in a revival. So you can no longer pull out that stick and preach it because they're used to listening. I've had plenty of friends like, hey, I went to 5 church services. You know, they listened to 5 people. They just jumped in there. And so we don't know anymore. And so the question that I have to ask myself when dealing with staying fresh and making sure that I have new material and new illustrations is, you know, what is that component going to look like in the coming months and years?
Duke?
Yeah, I think I agree with Lee, and I think I agree with Pastor West as it relates to the freshness. Let me say this. I think, you know, I'm big on African American preaching, and Cleopas LaRue wrote a book a few years ago entitled "I Believe I'll Testify."
Yeah,
where he argues that the best of African American preaching is testimony, and so preaching for us is not just preaching a text, but it's also living in the streets and living in the right now reality of our people and speaking and being a voice from those circumstances, if that makes any sense. And so right now we're all in it, and I think people need to hear our voice. I mean, this is one of the times where all of us can say that we are all going through a similar situation. You going through, I'm going through, and the word is, what do you have to say now when I know that you're going through just like I'm going through? You know, a lot of times, especially being home, I think one of the misconceptions that I have with people that, you know, who watched me grow up is that I don't go through anything. Oh, little Duke, he's had it great. When you have a father in ministry, those types of mentalities are placed over your ministry. But in this circumstance, they all know. And when I'm up now and I'm preaching and it's fresh, they see, wait a minute, he's living through this as well.
Yeah.
And so I do believe we ought to be fresh. I believe God is saying some fresh things to us. I also understand the difficulty. I don't know if you guys have dealt with it, but I know I have. There was the first few weeks, it was tough for me to find something because I was wrestling. And I've gone through depression. There are times where I didn't want to read. I didn't want to study. And that might not be your testimony, but that was just the space that I was in. And listening to the Eavesdrop and listening to so many different, of course, lectures and conversations that I've been able to listen to has given me the freshness that I need to of course, go back and be fresh in prayer, be fresh in study and preparation. And so to answer your question, I do agree. But for me, it has been a part, to get back to my original point, it has been a part of the African-American tradition for some time to speak from our own. It's not just preaching a text, but it's preaching from our own context. And so.
Absolutely. Jamal, you got something you want to throw in there?
Yeah, so it really helped me when I forget who said it, but it's in the same vein about preaching fresh. I had originally told my media ministry that on our television broadcast to replay old videos, but then on our social media, YouTube, Facebook, we'll do new sermons, we'll do the services that we do now. But after hearing what went on at Eavesdrop, I immediately called my media guy and said, you know what, let's start playing the videos that we've been doing and that we've been putting on Facebook and YouTube, because for a moment, you know, I forgot that, hey man, it doesn't matter how you look on TV. You know, it's just, it only matters if you're able to speak to a person in the situation that they're in right now.
Thank you, Jerron. All y'all that's on TV, remember that. Jason and George, Jason and George, we're hearing a lot, and even in this conversation about the reach, and I'm seeing 1,000 people. Can you all, because we've had these conversations, and I think the board hinted at this in their eavesdropping. I want you all to speak to the need to up our analytics. Just because you had 1,000 views doesn't mean that 1,000 people listen to the context of your whole message. What are some of the things that we need to be thinking through as the board talked about infusing the different concepts and different perspectives from people on our analytics now that we're in this new technical world?
Great question.
Well, I'll go first and let Jason, the expert, go second. I think the piece is, first of all, is digital engagement. I think it has to be more than just numbers, or we'll fall prey again to what we've always been prey to, big buildings and noses. Numbers do represent people, but if you just have people watching, what does that mean? What does your digital footprint look like? Do you have digital online cards? That's one thing. We were so happy the first week. I mean, our numbers were great. But we were like, oh, but how do we follow up? And many of us, we're just watching who's on, but are we following up with the people whom we've never seen before? How do we interact? And the other piece is this may be a little taboo, but this is what I've been stretched in. What are we trying to do with our broadcasts or our live? Are we just trying to touch more preachers? Are we trying to keep our homiletical heavyweight belts that we still great exegetes? Or are we trying to communicate with that unchurched person, unsaved person, who is maybe looking for a church? Now, we have the responsibility to make sure we minister to the people who are already there. But I think if we're not careful, we can easily revert back to what we've always done, because if we're really trying to catch the unclean fish, we may have to adjust some of our approaches. That's just me. And what constitutes a good content on broadcast?
Yeah, expert.
I would just, as you
Emory, I'm coming to you next on the same question.
Yeah, as you talk about analytics, make sure you have, if you don't have the ability to do it, have somebody in your team to get into the back end of your Facebook or your Instagram or even your YouTube. We see after you finish a particular, let's say Facebook Live, those numbers are huge. But those initial numbers that we see are really just for somebody who scrolled through, might have saw your vid, and looked at it for all of 5 seconds and kept going. And so one, we ought to look at it with a certain sense of humility. At the same time, it means that we have to have greater intentionality. The same intentionality that we have or had when we were doing in-person worship with the option to stream, we still need to have it. And so as you look at those analytics, I think they should help you understand. We look at what age group we're hitting. We look at the gender that we're connected with. And then it helps you to think about, well, you're hitting these numbers on this platform. Well, if you want to attract a younger demographic, you might need to go to Instagram. That has a younger demographic that's watching it. So, I mean, find somebody who can help you dig into that back end of your numbers to understand how long people are watching, you know, those sustained numbers, because it's easier now than ever to church hop. And it'll help you to know how to shape your experience to keep people engaged. And that's what we've sought to do, is to not just have an online worship experience, but to understand people are consuming this. Many of them are on their couches, in their, you know, in the bed, some of them, and they might not want somebody who's, you know, shutting it down. They might need somebody to speak to them. That ain't no shot at nobody, so don't y'all start.
Well, I agree with Guru Parks and Expert Turner. And so as a student in the back of the class, I think that this is a missing piece. Now, as you mentioned, that we're not talking about is the analytics and capturing the measurements, because data helps drive decisions. And I think right now that it's very important for us to capture, and I would say accurate data helps drive decisions. And I like the way that, you know, Jason qualified the whole idea. On your back end of Facebook, you get a chance to see a person who is, I think it's like 3 seconds, 5 seconds. I mean, they got it. It's real sophisticated what they have broken down. But I would look at, you know, even with our engagement with our online small groups, but then I think there's also an opportunity for us who's not getting engaged. And so we can create, you know, virtual surveys that we can send to our congregation to find out who once was engaged, who we not getting tapping on the shoulder anymore because of the platforms or so on and so forth. So but the other part is we get ready for budget season that's coming up. And I think the data and the analytics, the measurements will give us some insight on how we might need to shift money and shift focus. You know what I mean? And so whereas we might have been paying money for, you know, this staff or this person or this resource, now we start putting some money here. And so I think the data is, as opposed to just coming to the table, I feel, I believe the Lord told me, I think if we start capturing some of the data analysis, it'll help us even make budget decisions going into 2020. And I think that we'll have something substantive, because more than likely what we're probably gonna have to present, you know, as a budget to whoever our teams are, I have found is that having those numbers, that there's a narrative attached to the numbers. And I think if we're able to tell a story attached to the numbers, people will be more inclined, because more than likely, if we make this shift, it's going to force us and those in our church to pay for things we haven't paid for in the past. You know what I mean? And then maybe have to move away from not spending money on certain things or increasing. So I think that's something that we're not talking about. And the analytics, the numbers will help drive decisions. And I think will help us going into budget season. And I think those begin to see the game changers. I think, you know, as Ralph Douglas West II said, is that over time, that's where I think the separation is going to become. Who aren't just trying to have a flashy online service, but who is actually doing the homework on the back end. You'll see I think that's going to separate those who navigated. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents. Who's not, so, you know, the touches that we're not even getting, I think there's a way to kind of figure that out too, so.
Thinking of Ralph Douglas West II, he didn't say it live, but he did text me and tell me that one of the things that the IC3 senior board did not address is a silent group during this pandemic that could easily be missed and looked over, which is that young adult group, especially that single group. And I'm going to ask Raphael and Los to talk about the pitfalls that we need to be careful for as we're doing ministry with this group.
Big brother Los, please go ahead and kick it off for us.
Well, you know, in this season, it is kind of challenging to have a thriving youth ministry virtually. I know we've been really trying to think outside the box of how to do it, talk to different people and to try to see what they were doing. Some have created a separate worship experience online that didn't really fit what we were trying to do. What we did was earlier this year, the Lord had us to restructure our youth ministry, where we were geared toward partnering with parents, so that it was not that you send your kids to church for us to teach them about Jesus, but we partner with you for you as a parent to teach your children about Jesus. So we were sending it back to the home. And it's just so ironic that all of this happened through the providence of God, that now ministry has been done at home. And so now we're working with parents and providing content and training, because one of the issues was there were many parents who didn't come up in a Christian home. So they didn't know how to disciple their own children. And so we had to go through a process of training parents in how to disciple their own children. And so what we've been doing is working through the parents and providing links and other resources that we've come across to kind of undergird what they're doing in the home. We tried to have other little things, Zooms, that kind of thing, but primarily we've been working through the parents, trying to stay engaged with them in that way. Beyond that, we've been kind of limited.
El, what are some of the pitfalls we need to avoid during this season administering to youth and young adults?
Well, what's amazing about the social media movement, we have to go back to its intended goal, because it's intended to create another stream of communication, but it's really created a barrier of communication. Because when we were, and I call it pre-pandemic, because I don't believe it'll ever be the way it was. Because when we were having interactions with individuals, they could communicate through the computer, but cannot have a face-to-face conversation. So I just want to hit that quickly and move with talking about the intended purpose of social media. But now, like Carlos said, we come from a generation that all of us grew up in church. But now you're dealing with a generation today that know not Joseph. So now you have to go back down to the foundation. You're really having to get to these parents and these children during this time, because social media and Zoom is really all we have to have clear communication with them. But what I see with young adults is, and youth and young adults, is that you have to give them projects. They have to have projects of building. They need to see the purpose and the real meaning of this, because a lot of these parents, they drop their children off to us and want us to fix them. But the thing is, if it's not at home, it won't be done anywhere else. But what we really have to watch is don't use, you have to really get to these parents, don't use this time. Is this just we're doing church now because we can't get to church, but to show them that this is the foundation. This is like the gym. It's a lifestyle. So we have to and then also have to show them that it's an importance to stay connected in the Zoom and the social media, because this is what we have to do. It's really all we have right now. But to show them when the ban is lifted, when it's safe enough for us to come out, that this is priority. Because what's priority to the parent is what's priority to the child, and what's not is also in the same sense. So we must not fall pit to that this is just a season of what we're doing. So this is a lifestyle.
Dr. Credit, thanks, Low Stakes. Dr. Credit, Jamal, you are both at epicenters of this COVID-19. How are you all doing pastoral care and also trying to maintain the mental health of people and find themselves dealing with unusual grief? Kim, you want to start?
Yes, sir. Again, I've been providing more pastoral care than in ways that I haven't before, particularly with certain groups, using my team, of course. But I have been making personal calls and just particularly having, even if I'll tell them it's 5-10 minute conversations with persons who I don't normally get to connect with. So I've been intentionally reaching out to those persons I wouldn't normally get to connect with. The rest of my team, which is all of my ministerial staff in particular that are working with me, know that we're looking at some identifiers to who we reach out to a little bit more. Again, there are weekly small groups of engagements and people I found, people who would not be normally as engaged in my context, they are engaging more. So people who would have never gotten on Zoom for the women's ministry just to connect with the women and play some games and touch in and they're on, they're involved. All of our services, I'll just be honest, like we partner with other people in terms of helping feed people and all that. Those of you who have been to my area, our area is not, you're not going to find a soup kitchen where my church is located. We are situated in, it's a area that does very well. And so our church is not on the front line. We don't walk out the door. When you walk out our doors, there's a trail. People are running and walking their dogs. So we have to financially support, and there are those who actually go and help serve. But there's nothing in Boonton Township that would do that, because again, people just do well. So you really have to pay attention to your particular context in terms of that. I've been, again, through our teams, reaching out to everyone. I am, because of my psychology and counseling background, I'm very, very, very much engaged and concerned about people's mental and emotional well-being. So we've really been connecting on there. We have systems set up should anybody be feeling depressed or emotionally deprived of just companionship on any level. Again, those groups that are more likely to feel lonely or overwhelmed, we've been reaching out to them in special ways. So far, we are doing we're doing very well. I can be a bit, maybe in some people's eyes, I can be a little bit charismatic. So I'm very big on praying and fasting, which our church is very strong in that, and covering and pleading the blood of Jesus and XYZ, and those who have been affected by COVID in terms of testing positive have completely made recovery, and the rest have tested negatively. We're financially strong, if not, I don't like to say if better. I'm going to say we're financially strong because we don't look at extra numbers. We don't count on these extra offerings that are not part of our membership. So I only speak for what comes into our membership. And we are almost at 100% of the same giving in the last 6 weeks. And we're I don't know what to say. We're doing pretty good for a church, spiritually, financially, socially is our hardest part. As you mentioned, we're New Jersey, second largest states in terms of deaths and coronavirus positive number. And so we're in a lot of ways, people don't realize this, but we are more limited than in terms of lockdown than New York, who has numbers triple compared to ours, but we are really on lockdown in New Jersey. So the most the hardest challenge we're facing at my particular church is socially connecting. My church takes after me in terms of just being around each other in a very loving church. So that's the hardest part for them. But we're doing pretty good, pretty better than we deserve. Thank God.
Man, thanks for sharing that. J-Dub?
Yeah, so man, we were hit pretty hard by COVID. So we had a few dozen people who I think had symptoms, many who didn't get tested, but maybe about 20 who got positive tests, and for the most part they were leaders in our church. So but in spite of that, we were able to kind of bounce back in. We're making calls, monthly calls to all of our membership, every member on our roll to just to encourage them to stay connected with them, to engage them. Of course, we're doing Zoom Sunday school classes and Zoom youth classes. But I've also had in this time 8 funerals, and those are the worst right now because, I mean, you can't, when a person is weeping and grieving, you want to embrace them, but you got this mask on, and then you got these apprehensions about, grabbing them and touching them. So basically, that's been a challenge. But what I've been doing to try to compensate for that is just making those phone calls and checking on them before and checking on them afterwards so that they can know that I'm really concerned. Although I think that we all should err on the side of caution. So I'm kind of my care personally, but then I got other people working with me just as Kim does. Pastor Credit, we have a team of people trying to just engage everybody.
All right, thank both of you for that. I'm gonna go to Dr. Berry and Dr. Lee Edwards. As it relates to this notion that we heard the senior board talk on assisting smaller churches and asking for help, just if there's some things that you have been doing, be it a conversation, and how should we be thinking during this time as it relates to assisting our sister churches that are not as fortunate as those of us that are on this line are, but still are still critical to the kingdom movement. Dr. Berry, you want to go first?
Sure. I think I think much of what Dr. Hill, I liked her response today of actually just reaching out, in a brotherly or sisterly way to local pastors, just asking, how they're doing and if we can help in any way, and not in a pejorative way, not in a condescending way, but just, as I had an opportunity earlier today to speak to Pastor West II, that all of us in the same boat now. And I think having a conversation in a collegial way and not as, like you said, as, trying to make somebody feel bad, I think that would be helpful. And I think we'll be amazed to see what people may ask for. And so I think that Dr. Hale really nailed it, of just asking, if we can be of help, what do they need?
Lee? I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. So a lot of our churches that we fellowship with have older congregations and older pastors. So one of the greatest things that I've seen, my Pastor Lee Edwards Sr., is doing exactly what Cynthia Hill and Pastor Barry said, is, reaching out, having that conversation with other pastors, because information right now is key, from the top to the bottom. As some of us are privy to a lot of good information. Jason, you were talking about the not just views on Facebook, but actually the analytics of clicks matter. Not views, but clicks is the difference. And that type of information can really help a church get to the other side of this so that they are able to make educated decisions going forward. Then there are the churches that are struggling on the financial end. And some of us have churches and situations where we're able to assist in those, and we have a giving spirit and a giving heart. But what's interesting that I've been hearing over the last few days for some pastors that have been, at the plow, their churches are suffering, they have older churches, is not only talking about financial assistance, but church mergers. They're talking about stopping their church and actually merging it with another church so that the kingdom is able to continue to advance during this place and platform. And so where churches have typically battled in Texas, where we are, it's about territory sometimes. But now all of that has come down, and it has been a place and an opportunity where we're reaching across the aisles, and it is all about, you know, helping one another get that information, help with finances, help with media, you know, setting up and those things. And even now looking at different churches talk about, you know, closing their doors and merging with another church in order to continue the kingdom business. Those are some areas also we're going to have to talk about, but we have to be prepared for those conversations.
Yeah, tough conversations. Thanks for sharing that. This is turning into a Zoom battle royal where people are dropping off about a minute. I guess the last person's there will be the winner. Let me get Ralph and Duke in here because they both look like they're going to sleep. Dr. Duke, can you tell us about how you've been approaching preaching, and what you've been sharing with your people, what you look forward to sharing them to. I know, Dr. West, you've been doing the noonday and totally engrossed in that. What kind of message are you trying to communicate there? We'll go with Dr. Duke first.
Thank you, man. I think you and I had this conversation probably a couple of days ago, man. Primarily hope. Yeah. Messages of hope have been kind of what we have been looking at. And I, like Pastor Lee, have been wrestling with where we go next. A lot of what we have been sharing has been COVID-19-ish. And so we want to, of course, be sensitive to that, but we're actually thinking about now shifting, of course, our focus to other things. You know, one of the things we talked about is relationships. We're finding within our local context that being in the house with a partner is challenging during this quarantine period. And so we need to say something about that and prepare, of course, our people within our congregations how to address that and to be better in the area of relationships. So relationships is definitely one. A lot of questions and concerns that we've gotten is, you know, believe it or not, is doctrinal preaching has been something that has come back up, believe it or not. How do I know I'm saved? Who is Christ? Why is he important to me? And so these are the different subject matters in which we're throwing around. We want to be sensitive to the needs of our people. I say we, for those who may not know, obviously I'm in ministry with my father. I'm the executive pastor, so I do not operate alone. So he and I are, of course, in conversation of what we should be doing as it relates to addressing the spiritual needs of our people within our congregation. So that's basically what I have at this moment.
Amen. All right. Dr. West?
Well, I don't want to address COVID-19 my preaching or teaching. Is we just haven't moved past that yet, even though I'm like everyone else. When does the time come in our preaching, our exposition and illustration isn't aimed toward that. But right now, just finished Highway to Holiness. Right now, I'm in between the series of sermons on the Sermon on the Mount or passages that I've been playing around and praying with the book of Ezekiel, because right now, just so much of this period, I'm not going to say that we're in captivity in Babylon, but I will say that we're in a period and place of pause, and what's our normal is no longer normal. We don't have access to the temple, you know, and even though it's not the same as Babylon, it was 70 years. Right now it's possibly 18 years to us. That's a reality we like to talk about. But that's where I am right now, biblically, as far as preaching. And right now, as bad as I want to get away from that, there are different things that are being that are different things because of COVID-19. On one hand, you know, we keep hearing the word essential, another word for need. And so those different passages that are talking about our needs, you know, you have Paul, and then, you know, everyone preached, I think, several weeks ago at the same time, Matthew chapter 6. Right now, I'm literally in between, right now, Sermon on the Mount, and also the exilic prophets preaching to the people who are in exile with the people, as far as my preaching. But what's happening more than anything else is, as I heard, we got a chance to hear in the eavesdrop from the elders that we're reading the Word of God through just different lenses now. You know, I said a few weeks ago for a Bible study, someone was asking us what God trying to say to us during the period. I can't say that I agree with you, and I spoke about God's wrath. No, it is God's wrath. That was to take it. But I will say that God is getting our attention for us to hear Him say what He's already said. We're just hearing it through different lenses right now. So right now, I'm still attempting to put together adequate passages or messages for this series because, as you know, we planned our preaching months ago, but that has completely been exploded right now. In the midst of that pandemic, I mean, you, George, we talk about you all the time, how you plan out your text, thesis, titles, and all of that doesn't even matter right now. You know? So I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, you did. Dr. Parks, come on back in the room, Reverend. What is your concerns in this season? What is your angst, your anxieties as it relates to church, as it relates to ministry, as it relates to our world? What are some of those things that's keeping you up at night?
Well, my personal anxieties are making sure I'll be totally transparent that I have the stamina to make for this next turn in ministry. I think anyone who, I think it puts you more in touch with your own mortality of who you are, your skill set. So that gives me pause on some days. Have I teched up enough? Do I have the mind frame for this ministry? And most of us, if we be honest, we were trained for ministry in church that does not exist anymore. My second anxiety is, how do I minister when we come back? What does that look like? What does that look like? And another inward challenge is, what type of preaching is important that touches the souls of people? It can be homiletically masterpiece, but it still may not have a lot of weight to it for where we are right now. And my biggest anxiety is, how are we going to mobilize and push people to the polls? I think we have to be preacher, pastor, and activist at this point. There are so many things that are hurting the African-American community disproportionately: leadership, health issues. And if the Black preacher does not become activist, we just cannot hide in our studies and offices with our books and not inform our people. So those are the things that gives me great anxiety, and trying to balance all of that at one time. I just don't think the Black preacher can afford not to get involved in leadership and politics at this point.
Absolutely. Kim, I'm coming to you, and I want to kind of set the table a little bit for you, my dear sister. Dr. Watson said that we need to be preaching fresh. Don't be lazy. And even in this room, that has been a seductive statement. It's something that I think is easier said than done for some of us who do not have a staff, a system in place, where we find ourselves having to reshape vision, reshape leadership, stand beside staff, do more micromanaging than we want to do, not because we're micromanagers, but because it's just what the season calls for. As it relates to angst and the same spirit of that question, how are you managing that reality that yeah, I got to preach a fresh word, but I also got to check in with members who may be COVID-19 positive, or family members positive, a staff that now, because they don't have to show up at the office, is not working as hard or as critical as they need to be. Everything that I shaped and planned out for the last 5 years is now off the table. Every anniversary, all that off the table. My personal schedule now has totally shifted. Any mental health that I use that for is now off the table. Talk to me about that, still with the pressure of saying, now I got to come to pulpit with something fresh for the people.
Yeah, so I certainly agreed with Dr. Watson when he said that, and it is very important for all preachers. I'm also of the school of thought that you have to kind of do what works for you. Now, what I'm not saying is that preaching a bunch of old sermons will work for you, but I can tell you in these last 6 weeks that we've been in, one of those weeks, I preached a sermon that I preached prior. I went before prayer, I edited, and the reason why I chose the sermon is not because I was looking for something old, but because when I was in prayer, it just fits so well. In terms of editing it, it was a word that I believe God brought back to my remembrance to go and look at, study, edit it for this time. And that's one of the things as well. No matter at what level you're at, there's so many things that we would not have normally been involved with that we are now, that we have to be hands-on. Like I just told you, my entire staff I have given all of my staff off. Of course, we had people who were tested, so church chapter offices all have to be quarantined. I gave them all off, and while they are paid, I don't feel we're so on lockdown out here. I don't feel that it's fair to even ask any of my staff to come in, although that's the easier answer. So I say all that to say I've been a little overwhelmed. I have been doing stuff that, I would have never thought I'd be doing. I'm the only one, well, besides one other person in the sanctuary on Sundays. You know what I mean? And so, so with the preaching, though, I think, of course, the preacher's first job, primary job, is to go before God for a word for the people. But I want to make this clear, and I have said this for those who follow me on social media. I do believe that we have to be.
Well, hold on a second. If you don't follow Dr. Credit on social media, all of you that are listening, go follow her right now. It's the best follow in preacherdom. Go ahead, my sister. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Thank you. And so I said, like you said, I share a lot of stuff on social media, and one of those things I have repeatedly said several times in various ways. I've encouraged pastors in particular to first be concerned with your church, okay? I have to remind myself that when I get up on Sundays, I'm not trying to out-preach another preacher. I'm not looking for them to say, Doc, you did it. I am concerned. I've always been, I'm an apologist, and my method, aside from expository preaching, is my approach to preaching is transformational preaching. And what that simply means is that I strategically incorporate Christian apologetics in all of my sermons. I'm always thinking about the unbeliever, the atheist, the person who is of a different religion. So for me, that's always a part of it. So I don't have to intentionally worry about trying to evangelize in my sermons, because all of my sermons have that level of growing a person in faith wherever they are in it, because that's just my approach. Right. And so I'm really concerned about my church first. I really am. I'm like, I feel like you feed your people and everybody else eat. Everybody else can, I don't want to say eat the scraps, but the word is the word. I see a lot of, in my opinion, I see a lot of smaller churches where a lot of the anxiety on the pastors are not coming from trying to catch up and trying to do to grow on a technology basis, but because they're so concerned with trying to keep up with other people. And so they're more concerned about preaching and thinking this is a platform now for them to get some preaching invites, that I'm listening to them and I'm watching them like, you ain't gonna have no church when you get back. Most churches are already experiencing a dip financially. I heard the average is like anywhere between 30 and 50%. That's a lot. And so you already have that reality. And if you're not careful and feed your people, trying to reach all the masses, I believe a lot of people are going to come back and they're not going to have no church because of that. So I do stand on that. I believe your first priority, and at least, and if it doesn't work for anybody else, that's fine. We're all of our opinion, but I'm going to say what works for me. And for me, the results have been showing because people who would not normally be actively involved in prayer service or Bible study, or like I said, our small groups and our intentional groups, they are now. People are just as committed to giving and growing spiritually. And so I'm going to worry about my context first. Okay. Yep. I'm going to worry about my context first, and make sure my church is healthy, and I'm going to preach what God gives me for my context. But I know you're wondering like how I'm going to answer your question, but I already did. But let me just say it in layman terms, Dr. Hurtt, and that is we should all be absolutely sitting before God and asking God what God have us preach. And I believe if you do have a sermon that God brings back to your remembrance, and it fits for this time, I don't see anything wrong with that. Doing that every week, I think that's a problem. Of course, that's lazy, and you're robbing yourself and the hearers of what God could do by you availing yourself to the Lord. And like many of you, this was the first year I actually, I usually would do quarters, but this was the first year I actually sat with my ministerial staff and planned out the entire year of preaching. So some of them, because I travel out to preach on average one Sunday a month. That's to set up with my church. They give me the freedom to go, praise God. And I got a great ministerial staff that my church don't mind hearing because they're solid. And so now, not only am I used to, I'm preaching every Sunday because I'm used to being out at least one Sunday, right, of my own church. But everything we planned for the whole year, as was already mentioned, is done. So now I am between, like Dr. was saying, I'm between like, okay, I know it's our context and you want to be in the sick with the people, but I'm tired of talking about coronavirus. I'm getting back to ministering to my congregation as I feel led every week. I don't want to say nothing else about coronavirus that is already being said or has
think
already
about
been...
just take a second to think about what you want to talk about. We're gonna come back to that, but I want to go to Jason, and I'm telling you, you are a respectable group, but I want to ask some of the questions Ralph was asking me before he got on here, because a lot of what Eavesdropper said was great wisdom, but many of us have not been at this for 30 to 40 years, and even if you're like a Barry and like a Jason, you got a system, you got a large operation. I mean that with all seriously. That can help you out, is you still got to navigate through those realities where these guys have been at it for a while, and what is, secondary and easy for them to do just subconsciously, that's, a night of no sleep for us. Even if that's like explaining that to a board or explaining that to 13 staff members. Jason, just talk to that and keep it 2,000. You're muted, my brother. You're muted. So you got to get redos.
Thank you.
Changes.
Some of the things that I thought, particularly around, reimagining what staff looks like, certainly it's one of the things that I know that for the senior board members is something that's, not difficult to do. If you've been at a place 30, 40 years, you are leading, not only because you've got some victories, but, it's reputational leadership. So basically what you say goes. And so it takes a bit of explanation. It takes some negotiation. And then it takes strategy in order to implement. It just can't be, well, I heard on this Zoom webinar, that they're doing this in Atlanta, at Greenforest, that ain't gonna fly. It has to make sense and line up not only with the internal realities the church is experiencing, but with what is happening outside of the church. So, I mean, yeah, I don't think anybody here has been at their spot 20 years or over 15 years. So I would caution anyone as you're hearing all these Zoom, I know we're not the only one, there's Zoom calls happening every day. Please understand your context. Conduct really a power analysis. Do you have the authority and power to make this decision? If not, you're going to need some other people to help you make that decision, particularly if it's in the best interest of your church.
Absolutely. EB?
Yes, sir. I want to just add on to what Pastor Turner shared. I think that is so appropriate, because there are times where we have to realize where we are in ministry. Now, I believe that this is a prime opportunity where God can accelerate your influence in life of your congregation, because it's possible that none of our predecessors have ever pastored through a pandemic. And so I think that there's an opportunity, but you don't want to mismanage that. You know, I still realize that there's still people who've invested a lot of time, money, resources. So one of the suggestions, and I'm making just a few little tweaks, so I'll make sure that the relaunch roadmap goes out. But one of the things that I propose is that we develop a relaunch team. And I think this is a great opportunity too. Jeffrey Johnson's talked about this, an opportunity to raise up leaders. And I think this is an opportunity to also not just get buy-in and input from those who are already leaders, but there's some people in the pew as well who this is a great way to kind of get them off the sidelines. And so the other part is that we're not just championing it ourselves, but you have other people who have seen the same data, read the same articles, in the same meetings, and they also hear from a different vantage point. You know, as a layperson, perhaps in the pew, I give us some insight of how to package it and present it. And so I think that is an opportunity for us is to maybe form a relaunch team. And so in my case, I've been intentional to make sure that there is a deacon representation, a trustee, but the rest of the team is people out of the pews, people who have incredible acumen and talents and just really just been waiting to be asked. And when I asked them, they jumped at the opportunity to be a part of that. And so I'm not having to do all the thinking, strategizing, and they're they're utilizing their influence. And so that's an opportunity, I think, that regardless of the size of the church, you know, put together a relaunch team and on whatever scale or level that looks like for you. But I think it's some valuable input they can provide. They'll help champion it and even help you recognize some blind spots going forward. So I think it's a great way to help pastor through a pandemic. I'm sorry,
I would just tag along with that. You know, we don't know when the relaunch is. I know Georgia is farther along. I was actually thinking about coming there to get a haircut this weekend. What I've been doing since the very beginning of this, pulled in not only some key leaders that are elders, deacons, trustees, but also physicians, nurses. And we meet every week for at least 30 minutes to talk about how this crisis is evolving, what are the implications for the church, and now beginning to shift that conversation to what will re-entry look like for us. So I think it's scalable, whatever size the church is. Find those key leaders who you can consult with, and then on the other side of it, they can help you in communicating. Whereas they might not be able to accept your medical opinion, but they will hear Dr. So-and-so give their opinion of what we need to be doing.
Great, man. Well, I'm gonna thank you all for your time. I want to do just a real quick 30 seconds, closing comments, things on your mind, anything you want to share about your ministry, your church. Obviously, more than welcome to do that. But before we do that, I want Dr. Duke just to speak to us about the social justice component that we need to be mindful. I think that's been missing from this conversation, not intentionally. I just want him to speak to that, and then we're going to go around the room with closing comments and statements, and I'll close it out.
Well, I think to some degree, Pastor Parks addressed some of it. And I think even when we listen to, of course, Pastor Haynes, I believe he was the one who stated it, that one of the things that this season does for us is reminds us the importance of Jesus and justice. And so I think in this season that needs to be at the forefront. I don't want to, of course, state what Pastor Park stated, but of course you asked me the question. We got to start preparing our people now, which we're doing in our local context for the upcoming election. There's a census that is taking place as well, and we got to talk about that as well, which a lot of our churches are not saying anything about. And I know because I'm looking at a lot of our of course, Facebook Lives or whatever we're on, and we got to say more about it. Social justice is big in light of what is happening with our people. In South Florida, it's a big deal for us. And so we've got to stand. And of course, in light of reopening, that to me is a social justice topic, especially in places like Georgia and Florida. And so you can start there. We don't have to wait until November in order for that to happen. I think our voices need to be loud and large in this season. And so that's basically it. I think, I know some of us are not as social justice, how can I say, in tune as others, but something and sit down with folk within your congregation as well. That's one of the things that we've done. But what's going on? What issues are out there? And so if it's not something that you're naturally good at, sit down and call Jason Turner. Sit down and call so many other voices out there that can help you. And that was the power, I think, of the early session. You got so many different voices on there. And obviously, Freddie is one of those main voices. And Jeffrey Johnson is another. But hopefully amongst us, we can sit down and do the same. So that's the way I'll address that.
Well, thank you for doing that. You're in, if not the one of the critical states for our election. So thank you for shining that light and being that. And I hope you can rally other churches and individuals in your state so that we can make a real difference come this November. Closing 30 seconds. Please keep it short because everybody's fading just about, especially Ralph West II. We're just closing statements. You want to kick us off, KC, since you kicked us off kick us off here on the end?
I'll say real quick, encourage everyone. I am really praying for all leaders. Continue to trust God and lead to the best of your ability. And just know that God got you. Care about your context, and God will do the rest.
Bill.
I'll say this, it's been a breath of fresh air with brother and sister for the encouraging words. Just glad to know, I'm gonna say this, it's an exciting time to be alive, and I'm looking forward to seeing what God is going to do. I'll say that much. I'm looking forward to it. You can't have the promised land without the wilderness, and I'm thankful for the wilderness also.
Brother Lee, unmute yourself.
Piggybacking on everybody, it's great to be here. I hate that we're not able to be together during this time, but it's great to be able to have this courageous conversation with all of you. And I'm praying for everybody's ministry out there. That's definitely one of the things that I know we're all in arms about. But also, I'm specifically praying for pastors that are bivocational, that have to handle their own personal, their personal jobs and their families and the church. The pressure on them is insurmountable right now. So I'm definitely, sending out a word of prayer for all of those pastors that are in that situation also.
Jamal?
Just want to say thanks for this opportunity, this platform. Iron sharpens iron. So I think we're going to all be made better from this conversation that we had today. And be blessed. Hope to see you guys soon.
Emery.
All right. Again, just grateful to be a part of a great cloud of witnesses. And I would just offer as well to lean on the support that you have around you. Utilize the people in your church. Utilize other colleagues to lean on. And just want to really just encourage us to not go through this experience in our silos, but God has placed us in community with people. We may have to be more creative in how we stay connected, but lean on the ones that God has placed in your life.
Ralph?
I just want to encourage everybody to stay connected with one another. I mean, even though we're in a time of quarantine, we're not isolated from the believing community without the opportunity of conversation. Call your brothers, call your sisters, you know, if you're feeling yourself in a tight, you're feeling down, depressed, send a text, call. You'd be surprised how much that one line of just, hey, how you doing, might uplift somebody. And I know it looks rough and dark. Remember what the word of God says, you know, the gates of hell shall not prevail. You know, on this foundation, this church will be built. Church ain't going nowhere. I mean, church has been through some tough times. The Lord said that, you know, I'm coming back to my church. It'll be all right. It doesn't look like it, doesn't feel like it. But we'll make it through this thing. And prayerfully, it brings us all together, the believing community and in the preaching community. You know, right now, we're all on level playing field. We all got the same size church right now. We all got the same preaching itinerary right now, you know. But prayerfully, whatever those superficial barriers that were between all of us, it brings us together.
Jason?
I just want to say ditto to everything that's already been said, and I would add this, resist the temptation of competition and replication. Be who God called you to be. The pressure is there because XYZ preacher has a certain number of views that you don't have, but be faithful to who God has called you to be. Be faithful to the people God has called you to. And then lastly, I would add this, for those who are married and have children that you're sheltering in place with, don't fill up your schedule with Zoom meetings and conference calls. Be sure to make some memories with them. This is a time, as much as it has brought our world, disrupted our world, it's also created some wonderful opportunities to get reacquainted or reconnected with home.
Dr. Duke? Thanks, Jay.
Yeah. I think what I want to say is I want to thank each and every one of you for your ministry. I am proud of the church. I'm just proud of the church, and in just the shifts that we made in this period to keep the message and the gospel relevant to our people. You never know how much hope you're giving through the messages that you're giving on Sunday or Bible study, whenever. So I'm proud, man. I also want to say this. It's okay to not be okay. And that's probably the biggest thing that I've learned during this period. I've had moments, man, where I struggle. And I'm certain many of you all do, to know you got friends and loved ones. And then even to wrestle with, you know, your own, do I have it? Or, you know, if I do, you know, my family, all that stuff runs through your head. And it's okay to admit it. And I think that's a big thing for me that I've been surviving on. And I just thank you guys. Keep preaching, keep ministering. And I believe God is going to carry us through this, but we got to be bold and we got to be strong. And I think that happens when there's meetings like this. Thank you so much.
Thank everyone again for taking time out of your tremendously busy schedules. As you are tuning in, please check out our sister and our brother's social media page. Check out their churches. All of these are great preachers. All of these are great persons. All of these are great pastors. and to have their insight and perspective during this season have been a blessing to myself. I've been jotting down notes to those that had to step out early. Surely we understand Pastor Romell Williams, Pastor Carlos Kelly, Pastor Jamal, Pastor Emery Berry, and others that had to step out. We love and appreciate each of you. We're going to be reaching out to you at various times just for the mental health break that fellowship is. We are missing out on this week. It's been a great week to see Ralph West II dress up in a new suit every afternoon and every morning. It had been a great week to see, hear the stories, and more than anything that's missed this week, I love story time. I love the sermons. I love the class. I love the teaching. But it's the fellowship with with each of you that I've missed more than anything. God's going to get us through this. I don't have to tell you all that. And he's going to make us stronger and better. For that, there's a few of us that are check-in weekly. And if you want to be a part of that weekly check-in, just hit us up, man. There's no agenda, nothing fancy. We just talk about what we're going through, what's going on with the PPP, how I was offering what you preached, and all are invited to infuse in that time. Thanks again. I'm going to just close out with a quick word of prayer. Then I'm going to turn off live and I'm going to stop this recording. Anybody want to stick around and find out why the Detroit Pistons is the most underrated team in the history of America, and that the Bad Boys is the greatest team ever assembled in the history of NBA, I'll surely be on this line talking about that with those non-believers. And to add this, before we pray, that Michael Jordan is the least classless person in the history of all sport, and that no Piston fan, no Detroit individual, Isaiah Thomas or anybody else, will be taking any lessons from him about what class looked like, what sportsmanship looks like, and how you ought to act. He will not be the person we'll be taking that from. And so, peace to Isaiah Thomas, peace to Benny Johnson, Joe Dumars, Dennis Rodman, the first one, not the second one, and all else. All right, let's pray. Father, you're better to us than we ever could be to ourselves. Thank you for sustaining us even during this global pandemic. And we pray your blessings on every church, every pastor, every person that is out here holding up the bloodstained banner of Jesus Christ, the only true remedy to all that we are facing. It's for Jesus' sake we pray. Amen. Go in peace. Hold on, Ralph.
Hey, Ralph.
What?